Hey everyone, welcome to the Optispan Podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about whole body MRI. Now, this is probably a technology that many of you have heard of, maybe even some of you have actually gotten one before. I'm going to talk about using whole body MRI as a screening and preventative tool, potentially for health optimization. And I just recently had my first whole body MRI, and so I'll discuss some of the things to consider before you get one, some of the things I considered. I'll share my results, talk about my experience, what I learned, what I liked, what I didn't like, and where I kind of land now on the question of who and when should people use this tool. And then at the end, I'll give you some very specific advice on hopefully how to avoid getting ripped off by a popular internet influencer with a new MRI deal that isn't really very much of a deal, in my opinion. So to start with, one of the questions you may be asking is why whole body MRI? Why would you even want to consider this technology? And again, I want to emphasize here, we're talking about using whole body MRI as a screening and preventative health tool. And really the reason for even considering using whole body MRI is that it can detect pathology oftentimes much earlier in many different tissues and organs than other types of screening modalities that are currently available. So the types of pathologies that are often detected by whole body MRI are cancers. That's probably the one that it's best known for, is early detection of pre-existing cancers. But it also can detect abnormalities in a bunch of other tissues and organs, including heart, liver, kidney, spine, and many others. And when I go through my report, you can see a lot of the tissues that are and organs that are specifically called out in the whole body MRI reports. Interestingly, I think there's also a growing movement to pair the digital images that come from whole body MRI with artificial intelligence in order to predict potentially much earlier age-related changes or pre-disease, pre-pathological changes that are predictive for future health risks. I think there's a lot of opportunities here. This is exactly the kind of thing that the current generation of AI tools are really good at detecting, are these patterns that emerge from images early on that humans are unable to detect. So I think there's a lot of promise there. And again, I'll talk briefly about a brain-specific AI-based approach. Maybe in a future episode, I'll show you the results of that analysis on my own brain MRI images. Okay, so the pros of whole body MRI, early detection of pre-disease or disease-based signatures. MRI is non-radioactive, so it really can be used repeatedly, longitudinally, non-invasive, unless you're claustrophobic. Really, it's a super easy process to go through. I actually found it quite relaxing, and it's got pretty high sensitivity compared to other types of screening methodologies that are out there. The cons are it takes a while. So, it takes about an hour and a half for a whole body MRI, plus or minus a bit. It's pretty expensive. That's one of the big downsides, and we'll talk about price a little bit in a few minutes. And then the other one that I think a lot of people are rightly concerned about is the high risk of false positives or over-screening, over-treatments based on things that are abnormalities that are detected in the MRI that may not actually be a problem or may not actually be real. That's what I mean by a false positive. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So when you're looking at whole body MRI, you've got a few choices. When I was first exploring this for myself, I really only looked at two. I looked at Pruvo, which in my understanding is sort of the gold standard in the whole body MRI preventative screening world. They just recently opened a site in Seattle where I'm located, but at the time I was getting my MRI, they weren't yet open. And so I ended up going with Ezra, which is another company that offers whole body MRI direct to consumer. Ezra is kind of nice in the sense that they have providers that they contract with around the United States. Pretty nice website, pretty convenient, many locations, easy to schedule. And the cost, at least at the time I did my whole body MRI, was about $1,000, $1,500 less than the cost at Pruvo. So that's why I ended up going with Ezra. But again, there are other providers out there. If you can get your primary care doctor or concierge doc to refer you. You don't even really need to go through one of these direct-to-consumer providers necessarily. So anyways, I went with Ezra. You can check out the website yourself. So I went with Ezra Scan, as I said, partly because of convenience, also because Ezra was recommended by a really interesting company called NeuroAge Therapeutics that I was getting a sort of more comprehensive cognitive assessment through. And this was their MRI partner that they recommended in Seattle. Again, Ezra seems to work with other radiology providers around the United States in different cities. And this is a different model than Pruvo, which, and to my understanding, Pruvo has their own brick and mortar locations. It's their own providers who do the work. Again, at least in Seattle, the provider that I went to was not Ezra, it's Reyes Radiology. They do the radiology part, they do the MRI, and then Ezra just sort of white labels and packages up the results into their own reporting format. And they have a nice platform, web-based platform that overlays that. So it's more of a middleman sort of model with Ezra than with Pruvo. Okay, so overall, I'd give Ezra a really, I'd say 2.5 out of 5 stars. It was a mixed experience. Maybe I'll do an in-depth review. Like I said, the positives are they make it really easy to get a whole body MRI. It's sort of a direct-to-consumer model. Anybody can go to the website and get access. Their website, their visualization platform is pretty cool. I'll take you through that in a minute with my own results. But there were some pretty significant negatives in my view. So one is the scheduling is pretty clunky. They rescheduled me actually 3 times, twice for the scan, one for the follow-up consultation. And I think that's because they don't have their own brick and mortar, their own providers. So they're kind of playing this middleman, trying to schedule you and then schedule with the provider. And it just didn't work real well in my situation. They also failed to actually provide me with what was originally claimed on their website and what I originally purchased. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the additional scans that I paid for initially, they were not able to provide, again, because their actual provider in the Seattle area doesn't do those scans. I also was pretty underwhelmed with the insights beyond what was in the radiology report that comes directly from the radiologist themselves. And in my view, really the most important deficiency is that Ezra, at least in my experience, didn't provide any real follow-up care and instead just say, if there's a problem, consult your primary care physician. And that's a pretty big issue in my view, because most people don't have a primary care physician who can actually use the MRI data in a really sophisticated way. And so while I felt like the cost I paid was pretty reasonable, they also have since raised their prices, which again, I'll talk about that at the end, and seem to be offering what in my view is almost a ridiculously overpriced deal in collaboration with Brian Johnson. So again, I'll talk more about that at the end. So the pricing, it seems like they're moving into a category that is not particularly a value-based proposition in my view. Okay, so anyways, when I got my MRI, you go to their website, you have a few options. They have what they call full body flash. At that time, it was $14.95. Now I think it's more than that. Full body at that time was $23.95, and full body plus for $26.95. I think that's now up around $3,000. So I actually went with the full body plus because it has the whole body MRI. I knew I wanted the brain scan and I wanted to get, the other organs and tissues that were available. But the full body plus also adds on a low dose chest CT. And I'd been wanting to get one anyways. And so it seemed like a good opportunity to bundle that in and get it all done at the same time. And as you can see, the full body plus is pretty comprehensive. So the organs and tissues that they list, brain, spine, lung, bladder, ovaries, not relevant for me. Uterus, also not relevant. Prostate, very relevant. Kidney, adrenals, thyroid, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, liver, among others. So it's a pretty comprehensive whole body scan. And then they have an add-on option for a cardiac calcium scan for $200, which I also added. Again, I'd been wanting to get one for a while. And so it seemed like a great opportunity really to check that box all at the same time. So I was pretty pleased coming out of this initial visit to the website, scheduled my exams, thought I was going to get whole body, chest CT, cardiac calcium CT. And then I found out that they couldn't actually honor that because the provider in Seattle, which is Reyes Radiology, doesn't offer the chest or cardiac calcium scans. So I ended up going back to just the whole body MRI. Again, at the time, this total came to $2,500. Now it would cost you more like $3,000 for the same package. I don't know the basis for that. No information I have to suggest why that price increase, but nonetheless, that's what they've chosen to do. Okay. So again, I mentioned part of the reason why I give Ezra only 2.5 stars is that after I paid and scheduled all this, I found out I wasn't able to actually get those additional scans that I had paid and scheduled. And then they rescheduled me because the provider wasn't actually available at the time they had offered me to schedule. And then they rescheduled me again. So a little bit frustrating, a little bit clunky. I get it. It's part of the challenge of being a middleman, but I think they need to improve that process because it's not a great experience from the client perspective. So anyway, I ended up with the full body scan, went to Reyes on my scheduled day. That was a fantastic experience. Shout out to the Reyes Radiology Clinic in Issaquah, Washington. Awesome staff. They ran on time. Facility was great. I really had a good experience with the actual whole body MRI in the clinic. Like I said, I actually found it quite relaxing. If you're claustrophobic, I can see why, it might be disconcerting. But, I laid in there. They played music. It was warm. I almost fell asleep a couple of times. It took about an hour and a half, but it was split up into 4 or 5 sections. So, I was able to get out of the machine every 20, 30 minutes. So I really had a good experience, and I was in and out. So it was really smooth from that perspective. And then about a week later, I got an email that my results were ready. So that also was, reasonably quick turnaround. And I was able to log in to the Ezra site and check them out. And so I will actually do that now and take you guys through my results. Let's look first at the cancer risk assessment. There's really nothing here. So you can see because it didn't detect anything, nothing from the MRI that showed a cancer risk for me. My overall risk is low. The factors that they point to here are colon cancer and prostate cancer. I think colon cancer because there's a family history that I had put in my medical history. Prostate cancer because I'm a 53 going on 54-year-old man. Other than that, everything's very low. And like I said, nothing in the MRI came out suggestive of cancer. So that was a relief, right? To get that information. That's nice. Their lifestyle suggestions, this is like fairly basic generic stuff. Cut back on salt. There's really no reason for them to recommend that. I don't have high blood pressure. I don't have a problem with salt. Eat more fiber-rich foods. Everybody should probably do that. Eat 5 servings of tomato-based foods a week. Talk to your primary care provider about colon cancer screening. Yes, everybody should probably do that. Talk to your primary care provider about whether taking a low-dose aspirin is right for you. Again, I'm not really sure why they recommend that here. I'm not sure that, again, there's nothing wrong with talking with your primary care provider about that, I suppose, but nothing in my risk profile particularly that I think would suggest taking low-dose aspirin. So this must maybe want some bias that somebody at Ezra has to put that in there. So now a little bit more interesting is the full body report. And here it's kind of cool. So you get the key findings here, and they'll give you a risk ranking from 1 to 4. 1 being basically no risk, 2 very low risk, 3, okay, there's something there you might want to pay attention to, and then 4, probably worth getting some additional screening or additional help with whatever that particular issue is. So in my case, the only thing that fell into the something to pay attention to category was the spine. That wasn't news to me. I know for many years I've had lower back pain, really starting in my 30s. It's not terrible, not debilitating, just something that I have learned to deal with and cope with. Certainly I would suggest that it's probably exacerbated when I'm a little bit heavier in weight and gets better when I'm lighter in weight. Again, not surprising, but the MRI did detect some degeneration in the spine. You can actually click on view details and see specifically what is called out. So in my case, degenerative end plate marrow edema is the issue. That's a buildup of fluid, and they give you a fairly nice description of, what it means. The follow-ups, I think, is where I find this disappointing. And this is the case, I believe, with everybody. The follow-up is discuss the finding with your primary care provider. Okay, that's great. I'm lucky. I have access to really, really good docs who are in the space and know what they're doing. A lot of people don't. And so I do find it problematic that their recommendations are discuss this with your primary care provider. That's great if you've got a PCP who's on top of things. That's completely unhelpful if you've got the typical primary care that most people in the United States have. So again, that's the one thing I would point to that I personally think Ezra needs to improve on. And maybe this is true in general of whole body MRI providers, but I can only speak to my experience. So regardless, this is kind of nice. I like the visualization. So you can get access to all of your raw MRI images. When you first open it up, it goes through this cool sort of 3D rotation. That's pretty neat. Now, again, unless you're a radiologist, I don't know how much information this is going to give you. It's nice that you've got your own data. This would be cooler if you could do a bit more with it. And you can do that for your different body parts. So that's my spine, the only one where I actually had any issues. You can do it for your brain, which is kind of neat. Again, that's pretty cool. Actually almost looks like me. And then you can look at each of the different individual images going through the layer. So if we start way out, there's my ear. Nice looking ear. You can look at that. Look at that beautiful brain. And then go through the depth. All the way through. So anyways, you can play around with this kind of stuff. You've got the abdomen, reproductive organs, things like that. And that's pretty much the extent of the report. So for each of those different areas of scan, you'll get a little bit of information. But again, in my case, there really wasn't anything of note. And so there wasn't much to those other reports. So I did mention that, the recommendation is talk to your primary care provider. As I should say, Ezra does give you the option to schedule a consultation with one of their providers to go through the information in your reports. I did that. Again, another case where on their online scheduler, I was able to schedule an appointment, and then I got an email saying, oh, sorry, our offices aren't open that day. So I had to reschedule that. Again, a little bit clunky. You guys should fix that. But I did talk to their provider, very nice, professional medical provider. She went through the report with me, answered the questions I had. Again, I was underwhelmed in the sense that the information she was able to provide was really stuff I already knew or stuff that I could have found on Google. So I think they're unwilling to give real medical advice because they don't want to cross that line. And so from a business perspective, I kind of understand it. But from the perspective of actually helping patients, this to me seems like, again, the big deficiency with Ezra and potentially with other companies in this space. Again, I can only talk to my experience. So overall, my takeaway is I'm personally glad I did it. But in my case, it didn't really tell me a whole lot that I didn't know, other than a little bit of peace of mind that I likely don't have any major cancers or other major pathologies that could be detected by MRI going on, which is nice. It's nice reassurance. And again, my major concern is that if I had something big going on, the advice to see my primary care provider just isn't good enough. I think we need to do better if we're going to help people. So I think this is really one of my take-home messages is that personally, I think whole body MRI has a lot of value, but I wouldn't get one unless you have a medical provider who you trust, who you can take the results to in order for them to be able to help you if something shows up that is concerning or that requires additional care. Again, I do think whole body MRI has value in the context of a comprehensive preventative health optimization program. Even there, though, it's probably not for everyone. And so we'll, in a second, go through some of the things to think about. What I will say is I went in sort of lukewarm on the idea of whole body MRI. Like I was like, I don't know, is it really worth it? Is there any value there? I actually came out, even though it didn't find anything significant in my case, I actually came out with a much more positive view of whole body MRI than I went in with. And that's in part because of other people who I know who have gotten whole body MRIs over the same sort of time period, who did find things that were insightful, important, and valuable and actionable going forward. So I do think that it is something that if you have access to quality care and people who can help you once you get the results, there's a lot of value there. Particularly, I would suggest, things, cancer, obviously, cerebrovascular warning signs, I think, are something I hadn't really appreciated. Pathology, liver, kidney, things like that are hidden, maybe asymptomatic, or maybe the symptoms are there, but it's sort of nebulous and it's hard to pin down actually what's going on. I think whole body MRI can give you insights into what's actually happening and drive therapeutic strategies based on those insights. So I do think it's something that, people in their mid 40s, early 50s and later should consider. And again, if you have access or you're part of a care program where you can actually get the help after the MRI, I think there's a lot of value there. So leaving aside cost, like I said, I do think it's valuable for people, and probably start thinking about it in your late 40s, early 50s. One major consideration should be, though, your personal tolerance for false positives and the potential for overtreatment. Whole body MRI will absolutely find things that are suggestive of potential problems, but sometimes on further examination, those turn out to be either not significant or true false positives, meaning that the MRI detected something that actually wasn't there, or at least the reading of the MRI detected something that wasn't actually there. That will happen sometimes. And so I think you need to consider going in your own personal tolerance for that potential and the increased stress that could come along with it if you do get an abnormal result back. That's not unique to whole body MRI. Any screening approach, preventative screening approach, has the potential for overtreatment or false positives. I think, though, with whole body MRI, because it's very sensitive, the likelihood of those kinds of spurious outcomes is higher than it is with, say, something like a DEXA scan or blood work, or even maybe the liquid biopsy multi-cancer detection, which are sort of infamous for potential false positives. So that is something you should absolutely think about before you go get a whole body MRI. And again, I'll just really reinforce my comments about having quality medical care here. You really want someone with expertise and experience who can help you navigate the results, because oftentimes people who have seen a lot of whole body MRI or other types of screening methodologies in many patients will be able to look at, a 1.5 centimeter cyst in the liver and know immediately, okay, that's almost certainly nothing to worry about given your age and your health history. So I think, again, it really makes sense, and it's really important to be sure that you have access to that kind of care and to understand your own tolerance for getting results back and the stress that may go along with that. Okay, so again, just to summarize, I think whole body MRI is a really useful screening and preventative tool. I personally will likely do it every couple of years going forward, but it's not right for everyone. Cost, of course, is one thing to consider. Again, be prepared to pay around $3,000 for the scan, depending on where you go. Might be a little more, might be a little less. Consider your own tolerance for ambiguous findings and the need for follow-up tests, and consider whether or not you have access to appropriate skilled care after you get the test, because at least with Ezra, you're not going to get it through them. Again, I can't speak to other providers. Okay, so now the last part of the video, how to avoid getting ripped off. So after getting my MRI, I was, of course, captured by the Ezra email list server and have been getting emails from them since then. And recently I got an email for something called Ezra Blueprint. And it's got this smiling guy, the story of Blueprint, our most advanced longevity scan. And so, of course, I saw that and I'm like, longevity scan? I wonder why they're calling it a longevity scan. And then I noticed Blueprint. And so it's a partnership with Brian Johnson, the Blueprint guy. So they're offering a whole body MRI to people who follow Brian Johnson, presumably, who might be interested in this. And okay, great. So I looked into it, went to their website, clicked on the ad, and I see that Ezra Blueprint is now available for $6,000 or $208 a month, interest-free, if you want to go that route. So what is actually offered? You get the full body MRI scan, the chest CT, and the coronary calcium score. That's the package that I originally signed up for in September for $2,500. Okay, so those are the three things that I was going to get. Remember, I couldn't get the chest CT and the CAC because the provider didn't offer it. Again, I don't know how they're going to navigate that. You probably can't get that here in Seattle. I don't know. So regardless, that's $2,500. Those three things by themselves. So now the question is, what else do you get to justify the additional $3,500 at the new price point? And this is where I was kind of disappointed when I actually looked into this, because what do you get? You get an MR angiogram and a little bit of additional MRI, so maybe half an hour of scan time based on the other information you get. So let's say that's $300 worth of scan time, right? It's going from a 90-minute scan to a 120-minute scan. Okay, so that brings us to $2,800 for that. You get body composition, which again comes right out of the MRI. I don't know how much it costs them to do that additional analysis. I'm guessing nothing, but let's say it's $100. You could go get a DEXA for $50. So let's say it's $100 worth of information that you get there. So that brings you up to $2,900. Then you get an advanced brain analysis. This sounds pretty cool. Is this $3,100 worth of advanced brain analysis? Well, it turns out you can go to BrainKey, upload your MRI images directly to BrainKey, get an advanced AI-based brain analysis for free, which is what I did. And I will show that to you in an upcoming episode. Point being, this actually costs you absolutely nothing to take the scans that you get from the full body MRI, go to the company that actually developed the algorithms for doing this advanced brain analysis, and they will do the analysis for you for free. So the point here is that they've taken what is essentially a $2,500 package, probably already getting margins of, 30, 40, 50% on that, added what appears to be less than $500 worth of additional stuff, and marked it up to $6,000. So I try really hard not to assume bad intentions, but actions speak pretty loudly. And look, this guy's already rich. So I'll leave it to you to draw your own conclusions about what the intent is here. My personal advice is don't waste $6,000 on this deal. My take homes really are that whole body MRI is a valuable tool, I think, for a lot of people. Again, 40s, 50s forward. You can detect pre-disease, early pathology. Much of it's actionable, but it's not right for everyone. Again, obviously the economic piece is important. A lot of people can't afford a $2,000 or $3,000 procedure. You want to make sure if you do get a whole body MRI that you are comfortable with the possibility that you will find something, and that something that you find may actually turn out to be real, but it also might turn out to be not real. And that's the reality of these advanced screening methods. I think whole body MRI, as I already discussed, is more susceptible to that than to some of the other screening modalities that are out there. But that's because it's more sensitive and you're more likely to actually find a real pre-existing condition using something like whole body MRI. But again, my biggest take home would be, if you do get a whole body MRI, you really want to have access to quality care after the MRI, which can help you navigate that whole process. So thank you for watching. As always, any comments, questions, please leave them below. And I hope to see you next time on the Optispan Podcast.